presidents, delegates, organising committee, board of directors, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, can I say what a pleasure it is to be here on my first official trip to St. Louis, and what a pleasure it is to see you all here before me. I must say it's an encouragement to me as a relatively young, perhaps slightly middle-aged and professional diplomat to see so many of you taking such a great interest in taking time out of your busy schedules to come along here and discuss important issues. As Alicia said, it's a model UN, but nothing you're doing here this week is fake, it's all very real. So the best of luck in your endeavours, you're going to have a great week. Thank you to the Midwest Model United Nations in its 53rd year for inviting me. To have sustained such an event for 53rd year and to see that it is such a successful and well-attended event is a credit to all concerned. So thank you again. Thank you in particular for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about Ireland's involvement in and contribution to the UN and some of the key issues facing the UN today, which you will be touching on, at least some of them, probably all of them, as the week goes on. In accepting the invitation to speak, I am very conscious of the strong interest and commitment amongst young people like all of you here this evening to international and to global issues, and I hope that my remarks here this evening will help stimulate your debates in the course of this week. At the outset, given where we are, I would just like to acknowledge the central driving role played by the US as effectively both parent and midwife of the United Nations. The leadership of Presidents Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman was crucial to the establishment of the UN, and that's something that has been well documented, and credit to them. We are used to thinking of the UN as the universal organisation. After all, according to the UN Charter, membership is open to all peace-loving states. However, we should bear in mind and look back for a second that in its early years, the members of the UN controlled entry to what was an exclusive club. The original membership was determined by the wartime allies, and further membership was closely controlled along Cold War lines. This was a frustrating and indeed difficult period for those knocking at the UN's door. It was especially frustrating for a state like Ireland that belonged to no military alliance, was a young state and lacked a wider arena in which to advance its own interests and values. Eventually and thankfully, these barriers were swept away by the great tide of decolonisation with which Ireland so strongly empathised and indeed which we partly inspired. Membership of the UN became the prime symbol then and since, and guarantee indeed of sovereignty. When Ireland did eventually join in 1955, we lost no time in making it clear that we were bringing to the UN an approach to world issues that was determined not by alliances, but by our own values and our own historical experience. We like to believe that the commitment of the Irish people to the UN and its role on the global stage remains as strong today as it first did when we joined over half a century ago. From the earliest days of our UN membership, we pioneered the promotion of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. We also paid close attention to decolonisation and to the struggle against apartheid. Today, we make substantial contributions to UN development agencies and funds and are active participants in UN peacekeeping operations. Ireland's commitment to and support for the work of the UN is one which we have never taken lightly. On the contrary, our UN membership has and will continue to be a cornerstone of Ireland's foreign policy. This centrality of the UN to our foreign policy is a point which I would particularly like to emphasise to you all here this evening. The principles and values enshrined in the UN Charter of maintaining international peace and security, promoting the pacific settlement of disputes, and upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms are ones which have consistently permeated Ireland's approach to international affairs. In confronting a whole range of issues on the international stage, whether it be climate change, tackling global poverty and promoting development, working to defend human rights, or to eliminate the threat posed by nuclear weapons, the role and context provided by the UN continues to be of key importance for Ireland. In constantly striving to support and work with and through the UN, Ireland is not unmindful of the ways in which the UN could do better and where it needs to be reformed. Reform of the UN Security Council is one obvious area where progress is long overdue, and it's one particular area where I would encourage you to focus at least some of your energies this week. In particular, we need to alter the composition of the Council so that it better reflects the realities of the 21st century. There is also ample scope, much scope, for improving the working methods of the Council and increasing the transparency of its operations. Having said this, reform of the Council will ultimately require great political will among the Member States, and particularly the larger Member States of the United Nations. Ireland has played, and is continuing to play, an active role in championing UN reform. One area we have particularly concentrated on in recent years is improving the role of the UN in the development area and working to ensure that there is greater coherence and cooperation amongst all the various UN agencies and bodies active in this area. I should add that while the UN, often criticised as a behemoth, as an operation that costs too much money for too many of us, by international standards it is a relatively cost-effective international organisation. Ireland is nonetheless also working to promote an improved UN performance in the budgetary area and ensuring that the UN makes the most effective use of not insignificant resources which the Member States provide to it. It would be ambitious in a speech of this nature to do justice to the full myriad of interests which Ireland has in the work of the United Nations and the key issues facing the United Nations. However, I might just say a few words about some of those key issues confronting the UN as we see it: hunger, climate change, human rights, disarmament and peacekeeping. Hunger. Even as world leaders are coming together to discuss complex global issues such as climate change, the most basic problem of feeding the people of this planet remains. The fight against hunger is at the heart of the UN Millennium Development Goals. The objective is to halve the number of hungry in the world by 2015. In the context of global wealth and advanced technology, this should be a relatively modest goal, but unfortunately it's proving beyond us and it's proving beyond the United Nations as an organisation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something that has to change. The scale of global hunger is growing daily. Tonight, as we sit here, 1 billion people on this planet will go to bed hungry. This scandal represents an enormous collective failure by mankind represented at the United Nations. It is in all our interests as global citizens that we stay the course in relation to the Millennium Development Goals, and that we continue to work for a sustainable and just world where states operate on the basis of the rights of all people to participate in and contribute to society and inclusive economies. Against this background, the reality of hunger in our world persists. A Marco Rubio moment. I handle it much better. The global community must tackle this issue in a comprehensive way that addresses the fundamental causes of hunger. We need to invest in agriculture and agricultural research, and in particular to support women farmers. We need to invest in rural infrastructure, enhance nutrition, and support national and regional plans. Peace and security are linked to development, of course, and development is at the heart of Ireland's, and indeed of many other countries', foreign policy. We, as in Ireland, have maintained our overseas development aid above 0.5% of GNP, an important achievement in the face of major economic difficulties in recent years, and we remain committed to reaching the 0.7% UN target as soon as we possibly can. Ireland's aid programme represents a genuine investment by the Irish people in the world we share with the people of developing countries. We focus in particular on the countries of sub-Saharan Africa. We have prioritised investments in education, in health, in good governance, in the lives and rights of girls and women, and those living with HIV and AIDS. Ireland will not, and has never, turn away from humanitarian emergencies, whether in the Horn of Africa, Haiti, or indeed any place else across the globe. We will work with partners to highlight forgotten crises and the needs of fragile states, and to forge a much more coherent and effective international approach towards humanitarian action and development policy. Ireland has made the fight against hunger and undernutrition the key priority of our development policy. We have delivered on our commitment to direct 20% of our overseas aid budget to this priority, but we must do more. Collectively, we must act now to recognise the systemic linkages between recurring food price crises, humanitarian emergencies, chronic undernutrition and the effects of climate change. There is nothing that connects us more across borders and across oceans than climate change. It has been called, and rightly so, the defining issue of our generation, and I think more so of your generation. Without large-scale and concerted action on behalf of a part of the international community, we collectively face the threat of being overwhelmed by the direct and indirect impact of climate change. Climate change is not something happening in a far-off land in a distant future. It is happening now, it's happening here, and it's happening fast. It is not for another generation to solve. It is for us, it is for you, it is for the international community to take responsibility and to act. A few words on human rights. A deep attachment to the safeguarding of human rights has been at the heart of Ireland's foreign policy since the foundation of our state, almost 100 years ago. Ireland's commitment to the protection and promotion of human rights has been shaped by our own history. As a small island nation which has experienced the impact of colonialism, civil war and conflict, we learned the hard way that human rights can never and should never be taken for granted. Thus, when the Human Rights Council was first established just back in 2006, Ireland declared that it would seek election in 2012. We stayed true to our word and were successfully elected to a seat on the Human Rights Council just last November. This was an especially hard-fought election and represented a major endorsement of Ireland's international standing, and in particular of our advocacy of human rights across the globe. The 124 votes which Ireland obtained demonstrate the strength and breadth of support which Ireland received from the membership of the UN. In addition to supporting the Council's established programme of work and its need to respond to human rights situations around the world, during our 3-year membership, which began at the beginning of this year, Ireland will seek to advance a number of themes. These include the protection of space for civil society and human rights defenders, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights, the promotion of gender equality and the strengthening of the UN Human Rights Treaty monitoring body system. We will also highlight the importance of ensuring that human rights considerations underpin all areas of development, with a particular focus, again, on combating hunger, health and education. We are committed to a robust and effective Human Rights Council. We want to see a principal council that provides real leadership in this critical area. We also value and support the full participation of small states in the work of the Council. The Universal Periodic Review process has opened up an important space for national dialogue on human rights. Ireland engaged constructively and self-critically in its own review back in 2011. The threats to human rights worldwide are proliferating steadily, whether from widespread poverty and hunger, from repressive systems of governance, from religious intolerance, from gender-based violence, or from other directions. During our term on the Human Rights Council, we will serve the cause of international human rights protection as strongly and robustly as we possibly can. On disarmament, a strong commitment to disarmament and arms control has always been at the centre of Irish foreign policy and our policy to the United Nations. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, better known as the NPT, was concluded on foot of an Irish resolution at the UN General Assembly. It's something we're particularly proud of, and it remains the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. It combines a commitment on the part of non-nuclear weapon states to forgo nuclear weapons with an undertaking on the part of the nuclear weapon states to work towards nuclear disarmament. Ireland remains as committed today to the goal of a world without nuclear weapons as ever, and we will, as a small nation with a track record in this area, continue to press all of those who possess nuclear weapons to meet the overwhelming will of the international community and more effectively to complete nuclear disarmament. On the side of conventional weapons, Ireland was at the centre of the negotiation of both the Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention, concluded in 1997, and the Cluster Munitions Convention, which was negotiated at a diplomatic conference in Dublin just back in 2008. Both of these treaties have had and will continue to have a direct impact on the lives of millions of people, not only by preventing future casualties, but also through their provisions on clearing land contaminated with landmines and cluster munitions, and on providing assistance to the victims of these awful weapons. A major priority for us this year will be the negotiation of an arms trade treaty at the UN in New York this March. Ireland is a strong supporter of a robust treaty with universal application to regulate the global trade in conventional arms. Securing a comprehensive arms trade treaty remains a major foreign policy priority for Ireland. On peacekeeping, this is perhaps the area of the UN's work most deeply ingrained in the public consciousness in Ireland. We are, and with some justification, proud of the long-standing contribution which we have made to peacekeeping operations across the world. For over half a century, there has been a continuous tradition of Irish peacekeepers serving the cause of peace under the Irish flag, somewhere in the world. This goes to the heart of our commitment to the UN and the values it represents, a commitment which is an integral part of our foreign policy and which helps define us, Ireland, as a nation. It is clear, however, that both the organisation and contributing countries are being severely stretched in terms of the demands made by a steadily escalating number of peace support operations across the world. Regional organisations such as the EU and the African Union have an increasingly important role to play in this regard, in ensuring that the mandates handed down by the Security Council are met. The EU, through its ESDP, and with Ireland currently at its head in our role as EU presidency, has effectively placed itself at the service of the UN in ensuring that it can undertake its vital work in peacekeeping, crisis management, and the conduct of humanitarian missions. In other words, it's no longer the United Nations acting on its own. It's the UN, it's the European Union, it's the African Union. It's all of us working together in whatever part of the world, doing what we can. In conclusion, delegates, I wish to reaffirm that Ireland cherishes its membership of the United Nations. We strongly believe in the principles, the purposes, and the potential of the organisation. We look back with pride as Ireland on the role which we have been able to play over the past half-century, and we look forward to deepening our service to the organisation as it rises to the many and difficult challenges currently and in the coming years. It is only through such commitment to the UN that the international community will be able to succeed in ultimately making the organisation more than the sum of its parts, more than the sum of its fears, and instead make it what it was meant to be when the UN was first established back in 1945, the sum of all of its hopes. Thank you very much.